Hey everyone, today we have the meta snapshot for patch 14.4, and it's a bit of a weird patch because I don't think there's like a super dominating comp out there right now, at least compared to every other patch in TFT. So I don't really think there are S tiers right now. So that means it's super duper important to learn how to play around each and every comp, because I'm going to tell you when to do it, when not to do it for all of them. But right now, I'd say it's mainly like a 4-cost meta. I think 4-costs are like one of the more consistent comps right now. Usually it's reroll, but right now, like Street Demon, Misfortune, there are a couple ways to play her. Vex, Vanguard, Marksman, Aphelios. I'd say like these four are the top comps right now in terms of 4-cost units. Ironic, there are 4-cost comps right now, and the reason why is because they all build on themselves really well. They have a good item holder early on. They could go into a couple of different directions if you don't get like a game-breaking augment. So if you're able to make it to level 8, these comps are just super consistent, but there isn't one that's just like, wow, this one you could force every game and do really well. I think you have to play them in the correct spots. After that, we have a couple of reroll comps, Twisted Fate reroll, and then I added the AMP Naafiri Yuumi reroll. There are a couple ways to play this. There's a one with 3-star Naafiri and Yuumi, and then there's a one with just Yuumi where you go for legendaries afterwards instead. We'll cover how to play that comp along with everything else. BoomBots, nothing's changed there. If you get the BoomBot emblem, it's great. If not, don't play it. Bruiser Fiddlesticks, if you get a good artifact item for Fiddlesticks or you get the Bruiser emblem, then go ahead and play it. And then lastly, we bumped up Nitro. Nitrogen is probably going to be the most popular version out there. Naafiri also works, but I prefer Nitrogen a little bit more. And it got a lot of buffs in the recent patch, so that's why it bumped up to the A+ tier. And then in the A tier, we have Cypher. Still good if you get big loss streaks. Strategist Flex, playable AP comp there. Street Demon I think is a little bit better. Executioner reroll, still playable if you get like a super Rengar start. Veigar Reroll, same thing. Shaco, same thing. And then Anima Squad, I bumped this up from the B tier to the A tier because it is a bit better now, because they buffed a lot of Anima Squad units and they buffed Vanguards, which is a core part of Anima Squad. And then lastly, we have Exotech. Exotech's a bit weird because Vex is technically an Exotech comp. You'll find out that this Misfortune comp is also an Exotech comp, but like the pure Exotech, I'd say is a bit worse right now. And then B tier, we still have Golden Ox and a bunch of other random stuff there. Oh yeah, and Poppy's really good right now. So if you get Button Mash Poppy, go ahead and play that. Let's move on into the comps right now. Again, nothing in the S tier, so we're going to skip to the A tier. We're going to start off with Street Demons. This comp did get nerfed a bit. Nico got touched a bit, but overall the comp is still very fine and strong. It's going to revolve around Brand as your main carry with Shojin or Adaptive Helm, Jeweled Gauntlet, Guard Breaker. No real need to change any of those items. 7 Street Demons, some Strategists, maybe some Legendaries, take out some of the bad units in the later part of the game, but for the most part, just put the units on the Street Demon hexes and you're going to be good to go. Make sure every time you play this, you have some form of magic penetration, such as Static Shiv or Ionic Spark on your Nico. Static Shiv's a bit better because if we look at Brand's ability, he hits a lot of different units and they're often in the backline. So Static Shiv is going to reduce the magic resist of those units, whereas Ionic Spark will not, because Ionic Spark only affects the units around whoever holds it unless you have the Ionic Spark augment, which is quite rare, right? After that, you want some anti-heal. It could be Morello or Sunfire Cape. Morello's better in the late game, Sunfire Cape better in the early game. Build whichever one you can, it doesn't really matter. And then in the super late game, you could either itemize your Ziggs with more items if you have AP items, or Samira with AD if you are able to get that. Samira at 2-star, 7 Street Demon, gonna be very strong. You can check out the emblem part over here. A lot of people can use it, just put it on a legendary. It could be like Kabuko, it could be Viego, lots of different options. And if you want to reference this when you're playing the game, head on over to bunnymuffins.lol/meta or check out the Explorer page on teamfight.lol, where you can look up pretty much every stat you can think of revolving around Street Demons or any comp in general. But play this as a fast 8 comp. You want to go for 4 costs, so get to level 8 as quick as possible. You might need to stabilize a little bit in the early game, but ideally you play this when you're ahead. Ahead meaning you have like a win streak, or at least able to preserve some of your life. Or if you have like some form of econ augment like slamming, epic, or wise spending, things like that. Anything that gives you more econ, gonna be great for this comp if you get it in the early game, because then you are able to fast 8 and roll down and kind of stabilize. And if you're contested, rolling early is really good because you get your units before whoever contesting you is. So if you're ever in like a grudge match between other players when you're going for the same comp, like rolling early is going to help you a lot if a lot of people are contesting it. But luckily in this patch, I don't think too many people are going for the same comp, because there isn't like one clear dominant like, oh yeah, this has to be the best comp by far, as we normally see in different patches. Like you could see a little bit in the data. I want to do a little bit of data checking before we move on. For Street Demons right now, 7 Street Demon, 4.35, which is pretty good, right? But if we look at last patch, it's going to be a 4.13. So it's like a big difference there. A lot of people still like the comp. I do too. But it's definitely not as strong as it was before. Next up we have is Misfortune Flex. There are 2 builds that are going to be useful for this comp. It's going to be the Dynamo build and the Exotech build. So the Exotech build is pretty solid. This is like the new way to play Misfortune. I recommend most players try this out when they are doing this because it's kind of like the new toy, the new kid on the block, you know? And this is where you go 5 Exotech. You prefer having 1 Zeri item, 1 tank item. So that could be Pulse Stabilizer or Flux Capacitor, either or. And then maybe have some tank item for Sejuani. It could be any of them. Then you pair it up with Misfortune and you pair it up with Syndicate. So it works out really, really well because Zeri is a rapid fire, Twisted Fate is a rapid fire, so you get rapid fire from that. Then Darius is a bruiser, Mordekaiser's a bruiser, so you get a little tank synergy from that. Lastly, Misfortune and Jhin are both Dynamo, so I'm actually surprised this comp wasn't played that much before because there's so many different trait synergies within this comp that now that I list it all out, it seems pretty obvious to play, right? For Misfortune, you want to do a Shojin, Infinity Edge, and Guardbreaker. For Zeri, you want to do a Rageblade and Gunblade. And then for Sejuani, you want some form of armor penetration, so that could be an Even Shroud. You could build Last Whisper on your backline, but I prefer them having their main items like this. And then Sunfire Cape for anti-heal, but if you're able to get Aurora, that's going to be a good Morello holder in the late game. By the way, this comp is really bad if you do not get Aurora. Let's check it out a bit in the Explorer. If we put in Misfortune and like 5 Exotech, we can see here 4.47. Not that great, right? But if we look at Dynamos, you'll see that 2 Dynamo, horrible, which is what you normally play at level 8, right? Because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 units on this team comp right now. So without Aurora, it's going to be pretty bad. That's why you need to get to level 9 and find Aurora, because it goes from a 5.15 to a 3.84 just from finding that 1 legendary. So you do have to be a little rich to play this comp. And if you just do a broke fast 8, you're going to have a really, really rough time because getting to 3 Dynamo makes Misfortune cast a lot faster. Speaking of Dynamo, I know Dynamo gives ammo. The Spear of Shojin is kind of optional, but in order to get to 3 Dynamo, I like having the Spear of Shojin on Misfortune. Some people are doing the triple damage build of Infinity Edge, Guardbreaker, and Giant Slayer, or double Infinity Edge. I've even seen that before. And those builds are great once you get to 3 or 4 Dynamo. Like you'll see in this first version here where we have 4 Dynamo, that double IE, right? Like you want triple damage items, no mana items. But in the early game, when you don't have access to 3 or 4 Dynamo, that's where I like the Spear of Shojin. So I think it's a bit better in the early game, but in the late game, you could swap it off and like put the Spear of Shojin on Aurora and then put a 3rd damage item on Misfortune. Just like a small little piece of technology there. But overall, it doesn't make that much of a difference. You really just need the units and like any bit of usable items. Like best in slot items, don't get baited by it because it's not really that useful. I mean, it is, right? But the main goal of TFT is to get playable items in most cases. Like there are some units that absolutely need certain items, like Annie needs a blue buff by far, right? So you always build that on her. But for the most part, other units are pretty flexible, you know? Like you need the Rageblade on Zeri, but then the 3rd item, it could be Gunblade, it could be Infinity Edge, it could be a Giant Slayer, you know? You don't have to have perfect items every single time, and that's the case with Misfortune here, which is pretty nice. But let's move on into the next comp, which is going to be Exotech Vex. This comp is still strong. Like 5 Exotech is the early game version, 3 Exotech is kind of like the final version because you swap out a lot of the Exotech units for legendaries. And you could go for 3-star Varus if you want, you don't have to. But Vex is just going to have blue buff plus 2 damage items. Sejuani is going to have Protector's Vow, the Exotech tank item maybe. And then just some generic tank items. And then Varus gets all the utility items such as Static Shiv and Red Buff or a Morello. You want to do like a fast 8 for this comp, and make sure you have Hollow Bow or Hyperfang for Varus. Those are going to be the 2 best Exotech items for him. So if it's on 3 Exotech, great, you could go this version, which is really, really strong. Or if it's on the 5th one, you normally get a tank one as your first one, and then you can just drop that on Sejuani and then play 5 for Varus. And then after that, put in some Divinicorps into your comp. Like Morgana is mandatory. It might seem weird because she's a 1-cost unit, but you pretty much never replace her because she gives ability power to your team through the Divinicorp trait. And you have no other source of ability power really when you play this comp, so you absolutely have to keep her in. Normally when I say like, oh, take out the bad units and put in legendaries, like that's true in most cases, but in this case, Morgana, while she is still a bad unit, she's giving your team too much of an important buff that you cannot take her out. So keep her in there, replace some of the Exotech units to play your legendaries, And that's pretty much it. Like another good fast 8 comp, nothing too complicated there. Some options to go for when you're playing this is the Yuumi comp, because both comps need a blue buff. So we'll talk about that in just a second. Like I think that's like 2 comps later. So next up we have is Vanguard Aphelios with Xayah. So this is just like Vanguard Marksman comp. Good AD comp if you get like a ton of items, because you need to itemize like 3 different people, and sometimes 4 if you include your legendary random unit that you throw in. Normally that's going to be Aurora, and it could be up to 5 units if you include the unit that she pulls in from the bench. So this comp you want to play if you have an attack damage start, and if you have a lot of items, and if you have a lot of econ. So there's a lot of requirements for this comp. So don't just force this from the get-go. I mean, you can, like, it's a free country, right? But you're not going to get the best results unless you either play this when you're ahead or you met all the requirements I talked about before, because you need a lot of items for this, specific ones too. Like Aphelios needs a Rage Blade, Xayah needs an Infinity Edge, but then the rest are kind of a bit flexible. You could sub things in and out there. Leona, she's going to be holding the Sunfire Cape, and then I like having her be a little more tanky, so I do not put the Even Shroud on her. Instead, I put a Last Whisper on my Xayah. She hits a lot of different targets, so it's kind of nice. She applies it to a lot of different people, and that way you can save an item slot on your Leona. Of course, if you do not get a Last Whisper, you absolutely must build an Even Shroud on your Leona, because you need the armor penetration effect no matter what you're doing. But this comp is really easy to play because in the early game, you're able to flex either Rapid Fires or Marksman by playing stuff like Kindred. She fits both those traits, and then you can slowly transition your items over into whatever you have in the late game. So again, you could run any frontline. Like obviously you prefer Vanguard, so like Sylas, Vi, Rhaast, Skarner, things like that. You could also play any of the other tank traits such as like Bruiser or Bastion, but obviously you prefer Vanguard, right? And then for your damage dealer, you can go into obviously the Marksman such as Jhin and Jinx, but you could also flex with the Rapid Fire. So like Rapid Fire is really good because a lot of these people use Rage Blade really well, which is what Aphelios eventually wants. So you could put that on like Kog'Maw, Twisted Fate, or Draven. Obviously, Twisted Fate's going to be a bit worse because he can only hold the Rage Blade. The other items like Infinity Edge, he's not going to be the best user of it, but you could still use him because you could do stuff like Rage Blade on your Twisted Fate and then your IE on maybe your Kindred, you know, like you could sell Kindred later on. It's not as good to do this because I like to keep all my items on the same champion, so oftentimes like I'd rather put it on like Draven, for example. But these are just some of the things you can do in the early game with this comp and why it's a bit more straightforward to play than other level 8 comps. But of course, do not try to play it unless you met the requirements that I talked about before. But overall, pretty solid comp. Next up we have is the first reroll comp we're going to cover. This is going to be the Syndicate reroll with Twisted Fate and Darius. We talked about this a bit 2 weeks ago in the last patch, where you would think this is more of like a 2-cost reroll build, but if you add Draven in, it's more of like a 3-cost reroll build with 2 costs built into it, where you go level 7 and go for Braum, Draven, Darius, and Twisted Fate all at the same time at level 7. And it's a bit different than playing like the base version, which is just focused on Darius and Twisted Fate. Most people like doing the level 7 roll down because the 3-cost odds are too good there and you don't lose too much of the 2-cost odds when you level up. Because as you know, as you level up, you get access to more expensive units, but the sacrifice is well worth the gain. You hit your Twisted Fate a little bit later, but you're able to play an extra unit and you're able to get Draven and Braum easier. So if you're able to play for like the super late game, this is a better route to go. But if you have to like win regardless of the costs right now, then obviously play the base version, which is a lot cheaper over here, and roll at level 6. But overall, like this version is going to be a bit better. Probably going to get better results with this, but obviously it depends on your game. Itemization on Twisted Fate has not changed since last patch, Rageblade, Gunblade, and Archangel, but I will say it will change next patch because they're doing a lot of different item changes, including a huge one to Rageblade, so we'll really have to look out for that and see how that kind of works out. Main tank is going to be Darius or Braum. If you get 3-star Braum, swap the items from Darius onto Braum, but he's often hard to get because you kind of run out of gold in this comp because you're going for 4 3-star units. So unless you have a reroll augment, oftentimes Darius is going to be your main tank because he's going to be a bit cheaper to get. And then later on in the game, you want to get to 5 Syndicate so that you can put hats on your main tank and your main carry, and then itemize all your 3-stars. One mistake I see people make a lot is itemizing Misfortune. She's not important in this comp. You put your Syndicate hats on Darius and Twisted Fate, so she does not get her Syndicate bonus really. She's just kind of sitting there, so it's better to itemize stuff like Draven or Braum to get more value out of your back line. Misfortune, unfortunately, is not going to be the main carry of this comp, even though you are running Syndicates and she is the most expensive champion. One other substitution you can make in the early game is swapping out Rhaast and Draven for Kog'Maw and Skarner. It gives you BoomBot, and Skarner's also a decent tank, so some people play that version also until they reach the stage where they're able to get a Draven. Next comp up we have is Naafiri, Reroll, and Yuumi. So this is a comp I was talking about that uses a blue buff as well. So if you get a blue buff early game, or you have a tier and you're like, oh, I want to play a blue buff comp. Like obviously you could play Brand with Shojin or Adaptive Helm, or you could play Misfortune, she uses a Shojin, or you could play Vex. So obviously if you're doing 4 costs, Vex is going to be the go-to for blue buff. But if you are able to get a reroll start, you get like a nice reroll augment, or maybe you're lose streaking, you could go for like a Yuumi build with Naafiri. That uses a blue buff, which is pretty nice, and then you pair that up with a Jeweled Gauntlet and a Hextech Gunblade on your Yuumi, so essentially she gets mana from one item, crit from another, and then lifesteal from another, and then from Strategist she gets some damage amplification. Naafiri is a bit weird because you are only able to really run 3 Exotech in this build. I have seen some people go 5 Exotech, but you'd rather get more AMP than more Exotech, so unless I have a very good Exotech item on Naafiri, I'm not going to be playing this comp too much. So always check your Exotech item early. We can check them out right now, how they do on Naafiri. Just go to items, filter out for Exotech items, and Pulse Stabilizer is going to be the best one by far. And then after that, Hyper Fangs is a close second, but it is definitely a step down. Everything else though, you pretty much don't really want to play unless you get 3-star Naafiri for free, which is pretty rare, right? After that, you want to finish off Naafiri's other items. So the great thing about Pulse Stabilizer is that it's built-in Infinity Edge. It kind of does the same thing. So you're able to pair it up with a Hand of Justice to get some lifesteal and an Edge of Night to get much needed survivability. If you get Hyper Fangs instead, it's going to be a bit trickier to itemize Naafiri, but some things you could go are stuff like Infinity Edge because you don't have the effect from the other thing. Edge of Night is still good for survivability. And then if you're able to get lifesteal from like maybe your augments, because it definitely is helpful on Naafiri. Naafiri does have some like built-in Omnivamp, but it's best to get a little bit more to increase his survivability. After that, you want to play a tank. Sejuani or Nico are going to be the go-tos. Sejuani takes like the mana items, Nico takes like the generic tank items. If you get so many items, you could even itemize Annie or Samira, depending on who's 2-star. And then the roll pattern is going to be similar to the level 7 roll pattern we looked at before, where you go to level 7 and roll for Naafiri and Yuumi at the same time. After that, we want to go to the other version of the comp, which is more Yuumi focused. This one's going to be 5 AMP, 5 Strategist. And this comp is good if you are able to rush high levels. So this is not like a 3-cost reroll comp, though you do want Yuumi. But if you ever get like a champion duplicator, or maybe you have like Pandora's Bench or something like that, you could get Yuumi 3-star without needing to roll for her that much at level 7. So what you do instead is play normal, play standard leveling, and then build your comp around Yuumi and AMPs, and then get the power spike of 5 Strategists, 5 AMP, which is only doable if you get Samira. Main tank here is going to be Nico because you have a lot of Strategists built in here, and then utility items are going to go on to Annie. The way to play this build is a little bit more difficult than other comps, so I don't really recommend playing this Yuumi version unless you really know what you're doing, but hopefully you'll be able to get that idea through listening to this video. It would also be nice if you shared this video with some of your other friends who play TFT, or maybe even your enemies. The requirements for this comp, again, are just going to be having a tier early game for Yuumi and having a pulse stabilizer for Naafiri if you're going for that version. But in this comp here, the main requirement is having a lot of gold or having a lot of life. If you have a lot of life, you're able to go high levels because you're able to sacrifice some rounds in stage 4. And if you have an econ augment, you're able to get there without sacrificing that much life. So have one of those 2 conditions and you'll be able to play this, go level 9, find some legendaries, find your 4 costs pretty easily at level 8 before that, and you pretty much just play around the 5 AMP power spike. Pretty good stuff, right? Again, the rest of the details in the how to play section for this comp are going to be found on the website, bunnymuffins.lol/meta. Link is in the description below as always. Next up we have is BoomBots. So this is where the comps get a little weird because these are more like the situational comps. If we look back up at the tier list, we have in the A+ tier, like we're still in the A+ tier, but after the reroll comps down here, like we get like all the weird situational comps where you only go for them if you have like an emblem, for example. Like BoomBots, you pretty much only play if you have BoomBot emblem because 6 BoomBot is really strong and you can't get there without the emblem, right? But this is pretty much just like a Vex Bruiser build. And then you play all the BoomBots and yeah, nothing too complicated there. Very easy comp to play. You just do standard leveling, go for 4 cost, Cho'Gath main tank. Vex going to be a good carry, but Urgot probably going to do most of the carrying. Even as 1-star, he's going to be really good. And then in the early game, you use Kog'Maw as item holder, Skarner as your tank item holder. and then use whatever random unit you're using to tank as the BoomBot item holder. Obviously, it's better to use a damage dealer as a BoomBot emblem holder, but whoever you can get in the early game is who you're gonna have to settle with. But pretty much do not attempt to play the 4 BoomBot version. It's not that strong unless you get like a ton of legendaries in your comp, but pretty much any comp with a ton of legendaries is gonna do just fine. So that's not really a good marker for it. But this comp is a bit tricky because you need Urgot to get 6 and the emblem, so you need both an emblem, which means you probably did not get an econ augment in the early game. So you still need a lot of gold to play this, so try to get an econ augment maybe in stage 3 if you took BoomBot emblem on stage 2. That way you're able to make it to level 8 or 9 to find your Urgot, because that's going to be super duper duper important. The comp does not work as well without it. But for itemization on Urgot, it's pretty easy. You run Executioners with Vex, like Vex wants a BoomBot and blue buff. Third item can be like Hexa Gunblade, Rabadon's Death Cab, Guardbreaker, things like that. But on Urgot, like Guardbreaker's still good because they're both Executioners, so you want the crit strike chance. And then Last Whisper is decent, Giant Slayer's decent, even Infinity Edge is decent. You could double up on like the crit thing. It's not the worst thing in the world. And then another thing that's useful in this comp is Magic Penetration. You could build either like a Static Shiv on Kog'Maw or an Ionic Spark on Cho'Gath, because you end up doing a lot of magic damage with this build because of the way the BoomBot trait works. It's going to be mostly magic damage. Next build up we're going to go over is going to be Bruiser Fiddlesticks. It's a very similar comp. You go pretty deep into BoomBots, but it's more Bruiser focused, where you go for a Bruiser Fiddlesticks. So the way to play this is to either have Bruiser Emblem, Needlessly Large Gem, or whatever that item's called. So the way to play this comp is with Bruiser Emblem, Blighting Jewel, or Sniper's Focus on Fiddlesticks. Then you add in like an Archangels in the other item slots, and that way Fiddlesticks just ends up doing a ton of damage because of the way those items interact with him. And then you just play a bunch of Bruisers, make Cho'Gath your main tank, put an Ionic Spark on him, and generic tank items. Redemption is really good whenever you're playing like a lot of tanks, so in Bruiser that's going to be like the ideal item. And then whatever third item you can find on Cho'Gath is going to do just fine. In the super late game, you want to add in BoomBots, so add in Urgot and Kog'Maw for 4 of them, and then put Infinity Edge and like any random items on your Urgot. Really doesn't matter what it is, because in the late game, you're not able to pick and choose your items. You pretty much just get whatever you can off a Carousel, and yeah, pretty simple comp to play. You're just going to do a 3-cost reroll, go for Fiddlesticks 3-star, and while you're doing that, you can easily find a 2-star Cho'Gath when you're rolling that much on level 7. But it's really just about the Bruiser emblem. Getting to 6 Bruiser is one of the biggest power spikes, because oftentimes in the mid game, a lot of teams can't deal with all the damage that your Bruisers have. So unless they have a Rage Blade or like an Archangels of their own, they're not going to be able to blow through your front line, which allows your Fiddlesticks to stack up his Archangels. But yeah, if you get an early Fiddlesticks, you could try going for this with one of these other conditions. Cooking Pot is really good because you're able to stack a lot of Bruiser stacks for HP. Bruiser Emblem obviously going to be good, and you could also play this with BoomBot, but if you play BoomBots, I'd rather play the version up here. Next build up we have is going to be the Nitrogen Reroll. This is going to be the last comp of the A+ tier. Nitrogen, going to be pretty solid. It's built around the 4 Nitro, and overall, like, this comp got a buff because all the Nitro units got buffed up, and I've even seen people do Elise carry with this build, but I think Jhin is a bit more reliable. You just put a Spear Shojin, Infinity Edge, and whatever Exotech item you get on him that deals damage, and then you use something like Shyvana as your main tank. Some people itemize Naafiri, they call it like the Doggy reroll comp or Nitro Dog or something like that. That's going to be like the Edge of Night stuff we talked about earlier. If you get a lot of Naafiris, then yeah, play Naafiri carry over Jhin, but in most cases you're going to be playing around Jhin. Other stuff you could try is Misfortune with Dynamo or Zeri, but I think these versions are a little bit worse because these were kind of more based around 4-cost units, and when you do Nitro reroll, getting the 3 stars is super duper duper important. So while you're getting them, it's very easy to find stuff like Naafiri and Jhin 3. So that's why you focus more on like the Jhin reroll build, not so much the standard leveling builds that we looked at over here. Next build up we have is going to be the Cypher build. So if you get a Cypher cash out, great. If not, tough luck. You can't really play this comp, and you don't even have to play the Cypher build. They did buff it a little bit, so there's more incentive to go for stuff like Draven 3-star with Zed carry, but you could also play like any of the 4-cost comps that we saw before. So like Street Demon, Misfortune, Vex, Aphelios, all of them work with Cypher cash outs because you don't need to keep the trait in. So if you do get a Cypher cash out, you just have more resources to play a lot of the level 8 comps. But if you do want to stay with the Cypher, then you could look at a build like this where you go for Draven 3, Galio 3 sometimes, and then Zed as your other carry. And yeah, Draven pretty much just rips through everything, and you don't really need to worry about too much there. Next build up we have is going to be Strategist Flex. This is more of like an Annie comp. It's a bit weaker than the Yuumi AMP version right now, I'd say. That's why it's a bit lower on the tier list, but it definitely is still playable if you don't have Yuumis to reroll with, but you have a blue buff, and you are not able to go into Vex because maybe it's too contested, or maybe you just got a bunch of free Annies. You could definitely play this, play it with Strategist, and use Nico as your main tank. Nothing too complicated here. The one thing I will say is that Annie's items are pretty static. You want blue buff, you want Nashor's Tooth, and you want Spirit Shojin so that she casts really, really often. Utility items are going to go on Ziggs. You could put Morello or Static Shiv on him, and then late game, Samira is going to be a good carry and also a good AD item holder there. Next up we have is going to be Executioner Reroll. This is going to be a Rengar comp. Not played that often anymore. It's a lot weaker than it was, but it's still playable. It's still usable. I'd really only play it if I get Executioner emblem and then play around Rengar and Jinx. We could look at the data right now. Let's look at the Explorer. We have Rengar 3. Let's change this to maybe Diamond Plus. Yeah, let's do Diamond Plus. Diamond or Master Plus. It depends what rating you're in. If you're lower rating, like uncheck some of the top ones and like click whatever you are. But with the Rengar 3, he's mainly going to be played in the Street Demon version. So if we look at traits, for example, you could see like the most played. 3.89 with 7 Street Demon, not bad, right? Like 5 Executioner is still good, but people are playing Street Demons a lot more often. So go for the Street Demon version, which is the comp we have here. But if you have Executioner emblem, drop that onto your Jinx, and yeah, she's going to go ham. And she actually ends up dealing a lot more damage than Rengar. And then if you ever get like leftover items, drop them on either Brand or Vex, whoever you have 2-star, and tank items obviously go on Nico. You don't really need that many tank items in this build though, because oftentimes Rengar is going to be your main tank, because he's going to be life stealing. He does damage of course too, but he is supposed to live a long time for your Jinx to eventually kill everything. A couple of other different versions of this comp that you could check out on your own time. But next comp up we have is going to be Veigar Reroll. Not as strong as it was before, but still pretty solid. That's why it's still in the A tier. That's why like this week's meta snapshot was a bit weird to create, because normally I have like my S tiers, which are pretty straightforward, but right now like there is like an A+ tier that's pretty differentiated from the A's, but like the A's are still solid. So it's still like the same A tiers from the previous patch. It's just that the strong comps just aren't as strong as they normally are. So Veigar Reroll still can work. It's situational. You need a lot of Veigars to go for it. I wouldn't just blindly play this. So that's one thing to keep in mind there. Blue buff, Jeweled Gauntlet, Hextech Gunblade, perfectly fine. Get anti-heal in some way, maybe like a Morello on your Ziggs, Sunfire on your Poppy, Ionic Spark, or Static Shiv as per usual. And yeah, the big power spike comes from 4 Cyberboss, so it's really easy to play this comp if you have new high score. That's going to be the Cyberboss augment. And another way to get there is by having a lot of Veigars early. That way you don't have to roll too much for getting Veigar 2-star. For getting Veigar 3-star, and then you're able to power level to level 8 or level 9 to find Kabuko, or maybe you just get lucky and get Kabuko off of Carousel. It's that important. Like, if you don't have Kabuko and you see him on Carousel, even if he has the most useless item in the game, still take him, because you absolutely need him for 4 Cyberboss. It's one of the bigger power spikes in the game. Shaco Reroll, this is going to be a 1-cost reroll. Only play this if you're able to stack your Shaco early, obviously, because yeah, when Shaco gets a kill, he gets a bunch of attack damage, and the earlier you stack it, the easier it is to get your future stack. So you pretty much can't play this build unless you get a lot of stacks on him and get him early to start with an Infinity Edge. One common beginner mistake that I mentioned in previous videos is if you have a 2-star Shaco on stage 2-1 at the start of the game, you might think, hey, I have a Edge of Night, or I have a Hand of Justice, or I have a Bloodthirster. Let me play Shaco Reroll. Wrong. You can only do it with an Infinity Edge at the start, because if you have a healing item on Shaco, he's not going to be killing that many units, so he's not going to be able to stack that well. But if you have Infinity Edge on him, or maybe you have like an artifact item that gives him a lot of damage, then you can play Shaco. But unless you meet that requirement where you have a Shaco 2-star at the start of the game and Infinity Edge or some damage items such as like Collector, Prowler's Claw, things like that, maybe Spectral Cutlass can work out too, you don't really want to play him, because you just won't be able to stack him fast enough without some form of damage item. But yeah, after that, fill in some Slayers, get at least 3 Syndicate, obviously, and then for level 8, you could do like 6 Slayers or run a bunch of Legendaries to take out some of the bad units. For your secondary carry, it's going to be Zed. He's going to be the most obvious Slayer choice. And then for tank, it could be Mundo if you get him 3-star. You don't need Mundo 3-star, but sometimes you get him. If not, you go for Jarvan. Jarvan 3 is pretty solid, or you could just play a bunch of legendary units to tank for you instead. You don't like absolutely need like a super tank because most melee carries, like they're pretty durable themselves because they lifesteal, but it's still helpful to have some form of tank in your team comp. Next comp up we have is going to be Anima Squad. Anima Squad got a bit of a buff because all the units got buffed. The build itself hasn't really changed too much. You have Leona up front, you want her to be super tanky. You have Aurora with Morello for your late game, so if you get Anima Squad emblem early on, do not build Sunfire Cape because you normally just save the anti-heal effect for Morello because it's like the best item on Aurora by far. And then for Xayah, you just do generic AD items with the optional Spear of Shojin. Like a lot of people, they build Spear of Shojin very often on Xayah, but I don't think it's even that great on her. It's like only okay. You really just want like the Infinity Edge and the Last Whisper, and then third item doesn't really matter too much. It could be Shojin, it could be Giant Slayer. One nice thing to do is build Shojin on her and then remove it onto your Aurora for later because you don't run that many Dynamo. But pretty much anything goes for her, like Guard Breaker works as well. But you really only want to play this comp when you're ahead because it's like a level 8 comp that you need an emblem for Anima Squad, and you also need to get enough gold to reach Aurora because she is going to be the biggest power spike for this build. And in order to do that, it like costs a ton of gold, so be very careful when you just blindly go for a 4 cost comp because right now it's not the meta to just like force something right from the get-go before the game even starts. Like you have to get a good spot for it. So unless you get like an early 2-star Sylas with maybe like a 1-star Vayne or something like that, do not just take Anima Squad emblem, right? Like you need like a Seraphine as well. Like it's really hard to play without the units. So be very careful when hard forcing a comp. Only pick them in like super good spots. It's good when you combine all the different comps together because you could be like, oh, I have like this unit 2-star this time and this item combination. That makes it really obvious to go into something like Street Demon, for example. Or maybe you have like some attack damage items. You're like, oh, let me see if I have a better spot for Misfortune and Zeri, or if I have something better for like Vanguard Marksman, or maybe you have something good for Naafiri. You know, like you have to keep your options open. So that's going to be the name of the game for this patch. You have to keep your options open. So let me know down in the comments below what you think about this patch. Do you like patches like this where like nothing's super duper like insanely strong? Or do you prefer the metas where it's like clearly one comp is really strong and you can choose to contest it or not contest it? Honestly, it feels weird for me saying this. I kind of like it when 1 or 2 comps are OP because I can either play that comp knowing it's OP if I have a good spot for it, or I could go one of the A tiers, like A+ tiers, and not worry about being contested too much. Like it's kind of like a double-edged sword. I really like patches where reroll is viable, but not the best comp ever, because I hate being contested, you know? So there's pros and cons to every types of TFT metas, but I'm just curious what everyone thinks. You could also let me know down in the Discord. But that's going to be it for me today. Full information is going to be on the website, bunnymuffins.lol/meta. And of course, for all your data needs, head on over to teamfight.lol, use the Explorer tool, use a team builder. I think it's like a great team builder. And then if you want to look up like random info on all the champions and items, like there's that too. So definitely check that out. That's going to be it for me though. I hope to see you all next time.